Palestine was never a country.
Damn.
I'm going to say that again. Palestine was never a country.
Please do explain.
It never had its own sovereignty. It never had its own independence. It never had its own unique identity. Unlike how you have it today, where it's like we identify as Palestinians, that identity didn't really come into shape until about 1964 with Yasser Arafat, with the PLO. You did mention something in terms of biblical claims, and I do want to make this very, very clear. Anytime that I am talking about this conflict, I keep my Torah in the Ark. I don't bring the Bible into the conversation as well.
Being the most dangerous commentary show on Beyonce's internet comes with its own set of challenges. YouTube time and time again refuses to promote our videos because we have very controversial takes on extremely sensitive subjects. So chances are, if you stumbled on this clip by accident, you'll never get to see our content again unless you hit that subscribe button. It only takes 1 second. But either way, we're glad you're here. And now, back to the clip. What I understand as to the origin of the state of Israel, right? The claim that the Jewish people have on that land is a claim that goes that originally it's a biblical kind of claim where, hey, God promised this land to Abraham and his descendants, et cetera, right? Now, up until the late 19th century, the Jewish because there hadn't been a major Jewish population in that area since the 1st century when the Romans destroyed the Temple of Jerusalem, right?
70 AD.
Yeah, it's 60, 68 AD, something like that.
The land 135 AD.
Right. Now, mind you, the way the state of Israel was created, to me, frankly speaking, one of the main culprits that nobody seems to be blaming is the United Kingdom.
I know.
Because if you look at it, the way this was set up is in World War I, the UK and Germany were at war. So the UK had 3 allies. It was France. It was France, Russia, and the UK. They want to topple the Ottoman Empire, which is in alliance with the Germans. So now they understand that in order to topple the Ottomans, they're going to need the help of the Arabs, right?
Yeah.
So the UK goes and promises the Arabs, they're like, hey, you know what? If you help us topple the Ottomans, you can now have a unified Arab state, right?
Yep.
The Arabs buy into it.
Yep.
At the same time, what happens down the road is UK is now losing World War I. Russia is in the middle of a revolution. The Bolsheviks finally take over. And the calculation that the UK did, the reason why they wanted to bring the Jews close was 2 things. One, they wanted to bring the U.S. into World War I. And they understood that the Jewish bourgeoisie out in the States had certain connections that can help with that. At the same time, too, a part of the Bolshevik group in Russia that had been taking over the control of government, a portion of them were Jews, but the way the miscalculation happened is those Jews that were in Russia did not believe in Zionism. What they believed in was, hey, we in our land. At the same time, too, because that conversation started coming up in Europe because anti-Semitism was growing, and those states, talks of migrating, setting up a Jewish state. They first talked about Uganda and Argentina and all these places, and then settled on Palestine. So now the UK, in order to bring in the Jews, makes them the promise of a Jewish homeland, right? So that's the UK is now making 2 sets of promises to 2 different sets of people. World War I ends. The Treaty of Versailles happens. The winners are now dividing the spoils. So the English wanted control of that Palestine area because they wanted easy access to India to be able to move their products, right? And that's how they decided to. And that's when you had things like the Balfour Declaration, where now it gets put out that the UK will now be validating
they're going to make an initiative.
They're going to initiative towards a Jewish state,
into the land,
right? Yeah. So now, when you look at that, like, do you kind of sympathize with the fact that the Arabs felt cheated and lied to, and therefore can be a catalyst to more things going wrong in that aspect?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, just to provide a little bit of context, right? Because, I mean, Palestine at that time, or even that land, it wasn't like something that was in a vacuum in terms of Jewish history, right? I mean, when we're going to talk about the history of the land, the first Jewish kingdom was established by King David in 930. Now, you did mention something in terms of biblical claims, and I do want to make this very, very clear. Anytime that I am talking about this conflict, I keep my Torah in the ark. I don't bring the Bible into the conversation as much as possible, because then we can get into really mucky waters. I like to keep things very factual. I like to keep things historical. I like to keep things political and sociological. Right. So I do want to make that preference first and foremost. But historically speaking, archaeologically speaking, the Jews, that's where we descended. That is the cradle of our civilization. That is where, as a people, we were born. That's where we had our identity. We had our kingdom for about 1,000 years. Now, did we have different colonial powers? We had the Assyrians, we had the Babylonians, we had the Greeks, we had the Romans. I mean,
the Ottomans,
different occupying powers coming, bringing us in, exiling us out of the land, up until the time that the Romans actually kicked us out. And yes, so we fell into something called the Jewish diaspora, meaning that old Jews, we scattered to North Africa, we scattered to the Middle East, we scattered to Europe, but we never lost what our true identity is, right? So people think that Judaism is just like, that it's just a religion, but Judaism is almost like a suitcase. So Judaism is what we carried with us in order to keep our cultures, our values, our religion, which is tied to it as well. But ultimately, it's what makes us Jews. And this whole return back to Zion has been ingrained within our identity, the return back to Jerusalem. By the way, Zion means Jerusalem, guys, just if anybody doesn't know what the etymology of the word means.
Right.
But basically to come back to Jerusalem. So even within our prayers, we pray 3 times a day. In our prayers is mentioned that next year in Jerusalem, we will come back to our homeland, our ancestral homeland, where we were indigenous to. And so up until the 5th century, we were still somewhat of a majority in the population, even though 10% stayed, but in terms of people that are living there, we were the majority. But then that number began to fall. Then you had, after that, you had the Byzantine Empire, you had the Arab caliphates. So this is when the spread of Islam ended up happening. That's where a lot of the Arabs started coming into it around the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th century. They were switching hands between the Crusaders. You had the Mamelukes, and then you had the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire, they're Turks, right? They're not Arabs,
right?
But they run the land. And Palestine at that time, it was just a regional. It was just a region of land of an empire, right? It was just colonial land. The same way Siberia is not a country, but it's a region. The Sahara is not a country; it's a region. So was the region of Palestine at that time. Can I say my first controversial hot take right now?
Hey, man, listen. This is the Shock and Awe podcast, baby. There's nothing controversial. We aim to shock.
Can I bring the first shock?
Yeah, go ahead, baby. Let's hear it. Let's hear it.
Let's hear it. Put on your seatbelt for this one.
Damn.
Palestine was never a country.
Damn.
I'm going to say that again. Palestine was never a country.
Please do explain.
It never had its own sovereignty. It never had its own independence. It never had its own unique identity. Unlike how you have it today, where it's like we identify as Palestinians, that identity didn't really come into shape until about 1964 with Yasser Arafat, with the PLO. So they never had a king. They never had a leadership. It was just a colonial region of different empires that were ruling it at that time. Now, as I was saying before, the Jews, for them to come back to the land, to come back to Zion. So the pilgrimage, actually, there was pilgrimages that were happening in the 1700s, 1800s, but Zionism, the movement of Zionism, really came full-fledged in the 1890s with a guy named Theodore Herzl.
Right.
And the reason why it happened is because of the Dreyfus affair. So in France, there was a really high-profile case where there was a Jew that was
he was accused. A corporal or something like that, I believe.
He was general of an army, of a French army, and he was accused for treason, right? And it turns out that he was actually innocent. But because of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism is also a deep thing. We could do a whole podcast just on anti-Semitism alone. But in Europe at that time, Jews were going through a lot of persecution, whether it was through the pogroms in Russia, whether it was getting kicked out of Spain. We were always seen as an other. No matter how much we tried to assimilate with the community, no matter how much we tried to pretend that we were European, it's like, yeah, we're white, but clearly we weren't white enough, So we realized the necessity for us to have our own self-determination, and to basically have our own homeland, right? To have our own security, to have everything. And what better place than our historical homeland where we originally came from, right?